Welcome to Dead Man Talking. Tonight's show is a compilation of terrifying creature encounters and strange goings on in the wild wilderness and of course the deep forests. I hope you guys enjoy these stories as much as I. As ever, please do let me know down below in the comments. Please do like and share. And don't forget to hashtag Team Fear. Without further ado, let's get into tonight's first story, entitled Sasquatch Destroyed My Family's House. Let's get straight into that. There is plenty of outlets, support groups. Not for me. Everybody calls me a crackpot on a few occasions that I get drunk enough to talk about what happened. I don't appreciate that. This is a real story, and a real event that caused a lot of turmoil in my small family at the time. When I was 12 years old, me, my dad, and my mum lived in a managed large deer lease in Arkansas, near the town of Mena. My dad and I were skilled outdoorsmen and made a good chunk of change hunting pigs on horseback. At the time, the population had grown out of control, and they were viewed as pests. Not only did you not need tags to hunt them, but you could get paid on up to $50 a head basis. The meat is great for sausages too. So, it came as a surprise to my father and I when the pigs around our property suddenly began to vanish. At first we thought it was our neighbour, 20 miles west, strong arming our profits with his sons as he had before. But after my father went to his ranch to confront him about the issue, he came back ashed-faced and wouldn't tell me or my mother what had been discussed. All he said was Bill wasn't the reason for the shortage in the pigs, and that me and my mother were to stay in the house. Of course, being the curious young retard I was, I woke up before my dad, saddled my horse, and went into the woods. I rode the perimeter of our property, and as before, I didn't find a single pig, but I did find something else. About noon, I came to a large clearing in the forest. Then, as clear as day, what I first thought was a child stepped out in front of my horse and I quickly realised that this was no normal child. As it stood staring at me, I noticed that although it had very human-like face, with what I can only describe as slightly mongoloid features, it was covered in black or dark brown fur. We just stared intently at each other for what felt like an eternity. Then, I heard something huge crashing through the forest in our direction. Without the slightest command from me, my horse bolted in the opposite direction. I could hear it hot on our heels, snarling and screaming. Eventually, we got some ground on whatever it was when we hit open meadow, and it abandoned the chase. When I got home, my dad wasn't furious at me, as I had expected. He could tell something had happened, and after I explained what I'd seen, he hugged me and said the experience was punishment enough, and that I wasn't to go in the woods without him ever again. I wasn't at all opposed to this. That being said, this was far from over. About a week later, we were sitting at the table enjoying Mum's Gordon Ramsay-esque jambalaya when the phone rang. My dad excused himself from the table and went to answer it. He came back into the dining room and told me, "Get your boots on and go grab your saddle. Something happened at Bill's place." Without question I obeyed, and despite protests from my mother and demands for an explanation, we were soon going full gallop towards Bill's ranch. We didn't particularly like Bill or his boys very much, but in the Ozark Appalachian areas, we have a sort of unspoken law that if your neighbour needs help, you are to oblige them. When we got there, the situation was complete chaos. Bill's wife, Maggie, was knelt on the porch sobbing her eyes out, and Bill and his two sons were scurrying about, loading firearms and filling backpacks full of provisions. My dad dismounted and ran up to Bill and asked him, "What the hell is going on?" "My youngest was taken by someone. Maggie saw it. She said he was out feeding the pigs and somebody came out from behind the shed and grabbed him." "What did he look like?" Bill gave my dad a frightened look and said, "You know damn well what it looked like. It wasn't a fucking person." My dad gulped and told me to go get Bill's boys ready. We were going hunting. After Bill called the sheriff, they got on their four-wheelers, redneck for ATV, and followed us into the forest. The five of us got about 15 miles into the forest before we saw the first one. It had likely been following us since Bill's ranch, and I only got a small glimpse of it before it snatched Bill's oldest son, Grant, off his four-wheeler and ran off. It was big. This thing was easily 8 feet tall, and it moved like an Olympic sprinter. We chased it for another 200 feet before it dropped Grant. He was in a state of shock, but alive. Bill took Grant and his other son back home, but my dad and I decided to pursue the thing. We chased it for miles, but soon it hit deep ravines that were unpassable for even our horses. We shot at it, and my dad claimed he hit it several times. If he did, the thing didn't slow down one bit. We rode back home around 1 in the morning, after checking on Bill's family and writing out reports for the deputy that had finally shown up. Even after we made a huge stink about the issue, the sheriff's office didn't do shit about the problem. To my knowledge, Bill's youngest son, Tommy, was never found. Their official statement was it was a gang of homeless people that had taken up residence in the forest, and we were to quote, "Try and avoid them." Yeah, right. Nobody bought it. About 2 weeks later, they attacked our house. I was watching NCIS with my dad about 9 PM when we heard what we first thought was heavy hail. Our house at the time was a metal building. If you've ever lived in one, you know how things tend to echo. My dad went to the window and quickly reeled back. He bellowed at me to grab my rifle, and we both looked out the window, and to my horror, we saw about 8 of the huge things hurling rocks at our house. We stuck our rifles out the window and shot at 3 of them, and when we did, they would hit the tree line temporarily, but then they would be back 10 or 20 minutes later. It was now about 2 AM when we heard a hard banging on our door, and we knew they were trying to come in. Lucky for us, near the kitchen, my dad had constructed a tornado shelter the previous year. If you're familiar with Arkansas, you know it's smack dab in the middle of Tornado Alley, and we regularly get devastating F4s and F5s. We knew the door wasn't going to hold, so we all piled into the small cellar, and my dad deadbolted the heavy steel door. And they did indeed get in. All night we listened to them wrecking our house. All night me and my family sat completely silent, all of us, including my mum, gripping guns tighter than a vice grip. We were praying to God that they didn't find us. They gave up and left around 10 AM. When we emerged from the cellar, the house was nearly demolished. Things were strewn everywhere. The TV had been hurled against the wall and made a huge dent. My dad's air compressor had been crushed like a tin can. Understandably, we packed up the truck, put the horses in the trailer, and made a beeline for my grandparents' house in Dallas. We were never the same after that. We had to sell our beloved horses. I had to make the hard transition to city life, where kids made fun of my accent and would just bully the crap out of me all the way up to my high school years. Luckily, I overcame it all, and I'm about to get my master's next year. I am also happily married and expecting a daughter soon. Those creatures not only wrecked our house, but also wrecked my childhood. To this day, I am dedicated as a Bigfoot researcher, and I've worked with all the big names, including Fraud Standing and a man I very much admire, named David Terrorizes. I know there are some squatchers out there who are trying to preserve and protect Bigfoot, but I always carry a firearm when I'm out in the woods, and if I ever see another one, I'm blowing its hairy fucking head off. Something in the woods caused a car crash, and I don't think it was human. Let's get straight into that. I woke up in pain. My head was pounding, my ears throbbing, my sinuses burned. Hot blood dripped down my throat. Hot pain like fire licked across my skin. My head swirled and my vision swam. I couldn't focus my eyes on anything in front of me. I was too disorientated. I closed my eyes and tried to gain my bearings with my other senses. My eyes were no use, and the rest of me was just as useless. I thought I was upside down, tethered to something, my head and shoulders pressed against the ground. Where was I? My mind couldn't conjure up the images before right now. What was this? How did I get here? Where was I? I opened my eyes, grasping for any strand of thought. I knew my name. I knew who I was. I knew where I lived. But my immediate surroundings were a mystery. I vaguely remembered my mum talking to me, her voice light and happy. When was this? Today? A week ago? A lifetime ago? Where the hell was I? I tried to shove the panic back down my throat. I tried to listen to my surroundings. I could hear dripping. A cave. A hot sizzle. A kitchen. The sound of creaking metal. What was that? And, as I shifted my burning body to the sound of crunching glass, was I in an overturned car? I was strapped into a car wreck, and I was alone. As my vision slowly cleared, I slowly stretched my head to the left and saw a person. My heart sank to my feet. I knew him. That was Ben. He's my best friend, my boyfriend. How did he get here? What happened to us? He wasn't moving. Blood glistened all over his grey shirt and dark skin. His eyes were closed. I felt tears well up in my throat as my subconsciousness ran ahead of my mind, telling me something I had yet to decipher. But before I could listen to what it was that had to tell me, it stopped. His chest rose and fell, evenly and alive. The feeling melted back a bit as logic comforted my shell-shocked brain. I was alive, and he was alive. I slowly started to become more aware of where I was and what had happened. My vision came back stronger, but my mind raced just as fast as before. I pressed against the roof of my car. My lungs ached with every breath that I took, but I could feel all of my limbs, as far as I knew. I wasn't bleeding anywhere substantially. It was night time outside and faint lights shone somewhere. The headlights? My window was broken and the windshield was a spiderweb of fractures, impossible to see out of. I had no idea where I was. My airbag had gone off and wound deflated in my hands. I was trapped, pinned underneath the steering wheel and, presumably, the crumpled car. I reached my bloodied hand over and gripped Ben's bloodied arm, warm, alive. I shook him as hard as my weakened arms would let me. "But Ben! I coughed, blood catching my voice. "Ben, wake up! Wake up, Ben!" His eyes remained closed, and he was still as before, but he was okay. He was alive, I told myself. Back in the panic, back down to where I could control it. My eyes fell to my smartwatch, a gift from someone. I couldn't remember, but I did remember. It could ping my phone, and I could call for help. If my phone wasn't destroyed, I drew my hand back from Ben's form and flipped my finger across the cracked screen. I could feel my phone's vibration in my pockets. I must have never taken it out. I pulled my hands up to my pocket and slipped it out, but a sudden burst of pain made me drop it and cry out, but it was no use. The screen turned on, and I could vaguely see the tiny letters in the corner. No service. I let out a strangled cry. How was I supposed to fix this? They don't teach you how to survive in car wrecks, or even what to do. I didn't know where I was. I didn't know what to do. Was I supposed to wait until someone drove down the same road? How long would that take? Hours, days even. I didn't even know where to start. Ben would know what to do. I stretched out again and gripped his arm in desperation. "Ben, please wake up. Please, wake up. I need your help." I whimpered, desperate. He would remember what happened and what to do. He would know what to do. He just had to wake up. I heard it then. Crunching of boots on broken glass. There was someone out there, walking around my car. Why hadn't they tried to help us? What were they doing? "Help!" I croaked, my mouth not forming the way it should. "Please help us." A growl sounded outside. I must have been hallucinating. "Help! Please!" I cried. Why wouldn't they help me? They stepped, crunching the glass around to my side. I could see their legs, and then the stench rolled in. I still didn't understand. I just wanted to get out of there. I desperately reached out my hand, out of the window, onto the pavement towards the person's legs. "Please help me," I whimpered. They dropped something on the ground, something mushy, wet like a washcloth. Too smooth to be a washcloth. I heard another guttural growl. Closer that time. The smell was nearly overwhelming, putrid and sharp, stinging my nostrils and turning my stomach. Couldn't be real. Beside me, finally, Ben shifted. He groaned, moving, alive, alive, alive. He'd know what to do. I craned my head back towards his familiarity. "Ben, are you okay?" He groggily turned towards me. Something dripped on my hand, warm and wet. I didn't turn around. It didn't matter. Ben, please tell me you're okay." Ben strained towards me. "Oh, I'm okay, baby. I'm okay. What happened?" I didn't know. I didn't know what to tell him or what to do. I turned to the person outside. They were crouched down now, looking at me. Something was wrong about their shape. I couldn't identify it. Too crouched, too still, too long, too tall, too empty. "Please, help us." I didn't say that. My words out of their mouth, my voice. That person just looked at me, face shrouded in shadow. Too sharp. Too... What? Not enough. Not enough of something. Please, help us. That wasn't me. How were they sounding like me? Hannah, we need to call for help. Ben's voice, not mine. Not from the person, but from Ben. That's really his voice. My thoughts centered again. I tried. There's no service. Where are we? What happened? I can't remember where or what. My voice is breaking and I'm crying. Hannah, Hannah, calm down. It's okay. Why can't you remember? He turns towards me, his eyes sharp. He's a nurse. He will know what happened. Baby, does your head hurt? Can you remember how we got here? Oh, my head. It's throbbing. I can't focus. The smell is overwhelming. I turned back to the person. I could hear it breathing, jagged, deep, panting. Not enough, but enough of what? Hey! What are you doing? We need help! Ben's tone changed from gentle to angry and wary. Hey! What the hell? Get some damn help! The person let out another growl. Why would they do that? I didn't understand. Then he moved. He backed up, too jerky, too slow, too stiff, on all fours, crawling, no, standing now, backing away, swallowed by the trees. Too wrong. He didn't move right at all. My whole body ached, my head swirled. Again, Ben's hand rested on my shoulder. Hannah, don't go to sleep. Hello? 911. We've been in an accident. We're pinned underneath our car. My girlfriend is injured. We need help. Right away. No, I'm okay, but I think we need police too. We might be in danger. There's some dude just... some dude's lurking around our car. I-95, just past Wahlberg exit. I open my eyes. I'm in an ambulance. A woman shines a light into my eyes, too bright. I could hear Ben's voice. He was here too, talking to someone. No, officer. Neither of us are under the influence. We just came back from her mum's house. A man with a deep voice. Are you sure of what you saw? Totally positive. Yes, sir. There was a man in the middle of the street leaning over some sort of carcass. A deer carcass or something. That's why we crashed. Because my girlfriend swerved to miss him. All right. Thank you, Mr. Jules. Let's get you and your girlfriend to hospital. And that's all I remember. A cigarette? Let's get straight into that. My family owns a few ATVs in a small cabin in the mountains of West Virginia. Provided that the weather forecasts look favourable for riding, we try to make a couple of trips up there each month during the summer to unplug and unwind. We decided to go last weekend even though it was supposed to rain, figuring it wouldn't hurt to get a bit muddy in exchange for being able to spend the 3-day weekend breaking up some new trails. Despite the fact that we share the mountain with other families, it's extremely private. There's a lot of space between each cabin, and unless you're hunting, setting off fireworks or on a four-wheeler, you'd never know anyone else was up there with you. Our closest neighbour is about a 30-minute walk away, but him and his wife were not on the mountain this particular weekend. After we arrived and unload, it's sort of a tradition to do a lap around the trails, not only to see who else is vacationing there, but also to make sure the trails are safe. It's not unusual for a tree to come down or to have large rocks slide off of the hillsides and onto the paths. We always make sure to clear the trails before getting any serious riding done. We were fortunate to find that nothing major had obstructed any of our usual trails, and thought ourselves even luckier to realise that only 2 other families were occupying the mountain with us, and that they were on the opposite side of the mountain. Don't get me wrong, we enjoy company if it comes our way, and everyone is very friendly. It's just common courtesy to drive slow when others are near you. The ATVs are loud and kick up a lot of dirt, but when the cabins are vacant, we're free to go as fast as we like. After our initial lap and some dinner, it started to storm, so we all decided to tuck in and watch a movie before heading to bed. I'm going to the bathroom. Don't start the movie without me, I said, leaning halfway out of the sliding glass door. I'll be right back. Flashlight in hand, I dashed through the rain to the small outhouse and quickly did my business. On my way back to the cabin, which was only about 35 yards away from the outhouse, I heard something strange. It sounded almost like muffled laughter, but it was scratchy and seemed like it was coming from multiple people. Thinking my family had started a movie, I hustled back to the cabin. "Hey," I said, "wait for me." Jenna, my sister, arched a brow and waved the remote control towards the television screen, where the movie was still paused on the same opening credits that it had been when I'd left. "Ah, we did?" "Oh, my bad. I heard you guys laughing, so I thought you started a movie with something funny happening," I replied, plopping myself into the bottom bunk of one of our bunk beds. The room got quiet for a moment. None of us were laughing. Jenna said, in an odd tone, her voice suggesting I was acting strangely. Mum and Dad were half asleep and I was trying to get the signal. I rolled my eyes. Jenna had just turned 18 that spring and has been on these trips to the cabin ever since she was old enough to hold a phone, so she knew there wasn't an ice cube's chance of hell of getting even one bar of service out here. Having just acquired herself a new boyfriend, though, that didn't stop her from trying. "Okay, well, whatever. Let's watch the movie." By the time the movie had finished, I'd pretty much forgotten about the sound I'd heard, thinking it was probably just an animal and the rain or the echoing from being up so high had distorted a call I would have otherwise been able to identify. Mum and Dad had already fallen asleep and Jenna was ready to follow suit when I rolled out of bed. "I'm going to go have a smoke since the rain has slowed up. You can turn the light out if you want," I said to my sister, knowing she was ready to lie down. "Thanks. Make sure you lock the door when you come back in," she replied before hitting the light switch with her foot from the top bunk. "Will do," I whispered, already halfway out of the door. The rain had gone from a downpour to a light trickle, and other than fat blobs of water dribbling off the leaves they collected on, it was eerily quiet. I thought this was strange, because at the very least there should have been a chorus from the frogs and the crickets, even if other wildlife had still yet to venture back out from the rain. I took a moment to scan my surroundings, knowing that when things got quiet, it usually meant the likelihood of a predator being close could be the cause. After doing a thorough sweep of the area, however, I saw nothing. I heard nothing except my own blood thudding through my veins. I lit up a cigarette despite my unusual discomfort, deciding to just stay on the porch and look out onto the forest. Our porch is attached to the cabin, made of wood and fenced in around it with the exception of two small sets of stairs on either side of it. One set of steps leads directly onto the path to the outhouse, and the other leads onto the path of our driveway. I had been outside for about 3 or 4 minutes at this point, having smoked about half of my cigarette, and had just started to let myself relax when I heard something step onto the stairs behind and to the right of me. The wood creaked noticeably, as it typically does when a significant amount of weight is applied to it. Immediately I gasped and whipped around so fast I almost slipped on the rain-soaked wood. My eyes had plenty of time to adjust to the darkness at this point, so when I saw nothing standing there where the noise had come from, I found myself frozen. I knew I had heard something. The only other sounds around me were drops of rain plopping onto the ground. Was the wood just expanding from soaking up the water? I took another drag off my cigarette and slowly moved closer to the door of the cabin, doing my best not to step onto any of the boards I knew would creak if I did. I was looking in the direction of the steps that led to the outhouse path, which were now to my left, when directly from my right I heard the same exact creak. I don't mean that the steps to my right also creaked, I mean I heard the sound that the left steps make coming from the right steps, only our right steps do not make a noise when they're stepped on. What the fuck? I yelled, jumping back and putting the picnic table between myself and the stairs. Leaning over slightly, I looked toward the driveway and what I saw made my blood run cold. In the distance, about 50 feet down my driveway, was something pale and crooked. It almost looked like someone was hunched over and leaning against the tree to support themselves from falling over. For all of a second I actually became concerned, thinking it could have been one of our neighbours that needed something. Maybe their power had gone out in the storm, or maybe they'd been hurt while doing something in the rain. It was then I remembered that our closest neighbours weren't home. In fact, all but 2 of our neighbours weren't home, and they were clear across the mountain. As soon as I remembered this, I heard the same scratchy laughter that I'd heard when I was returning from the outhouse, and it was coming from the steps to my left, where I'd heard the steps creak the first time. I turned my head swiftly, but again, saw nothing. Just before I decided to go back inside, I looked over to where I had seen the hunched-over figure, wanting to make sure it hadn't got any closer during the brief moment that I'd looked away from it. It hadn't moved closer, but it had moved. Whatever it was, it hadn't been hunched over. It had been squatting down and was now twice as tall as I thought it had been, standing perfectly straight with the top of its head brushing against a tree branch. I couldn't see its face, but where I thought its mouth should be, I saw a faint red light, growing and dimming in intensity, like it was smoking a cigarette. As fast as I could drop my cigarette, I lunged for the door, dragged it open and slammed it shut, immediately locking and pulling the curtains over it. "Oh, what the hell, Lauren?" Jenna groaned. "Do you mind?" I was panting at this point, unable to say anything back, and I think my lack of response was what disturbed my sister, more than my frantic breathing and unwillingness to move away from the door. "Whoa, what's wrong? Are you okay?" she whispered in a fast, high pitch, sitting up to look at me, and then the door, and then our parents. Something standing out there. I don't know what it was. It made the laugh. It was smoking, I think." I rambled out quickly, pressing my hand against my chest as I moved across the cabin to look out the window facing the driveway. "I can't see it anymore. It was right there," I emphasised in an excited but wobbly whisper, jabbing my finger onto the glass in the direction of the tree that the figure had been perched against. "Stop trying to scare me. You're full of shit," Jenna barked, moving back off over to the bunk, even though she thought I was lying. "Go to bed, both of you," Dad suddenly bellowed, making us both jump. "It's 1 in the damn morning. I packed, drove for 3 hours, unpacked, and need to get out early to make sure the storm didn't bring anything down. Go to sleep." Jenna recoiled and sunk back into her bunk almost immediately. "Lauren woke me up too, okay? Jeez." "Dad, I saw something standing by the tree over the..." "It was probably just a damn deer. That's enough. No one is here except us. We checked already. Bed." "But Dad, it was at..." "Lauren." "Fine," I squawked back, making sure to give the driveway another once over before closing the blinds and crawling into my bunk. I didn't sleep well that night, even though I didn't see or hear anything else. Once morning came, I made a point of taking Jenna to the outhouse with me, refusing to walk alone despite the sun shining brightly onto the raindrops, making the whole forest sparkle. Stepping out onto the porch first, I gasped. Directly in front of me, perfectly centred on the top of the picnic table, there was a small pile of rocks. It was arranged in such a way that it formed a small tower. Smaller rocks were set to balance on top of the larger ones. It wasn't something an animal could have left behind, and on the very top of the tower, sitting up straight, was my cigarette. The time I witnessed something watching us from the trees. Let's get straight into that. Something I witnessed while I was camping over 10 years ago. Growing up, I spent many weekends and holidays camping. I live in South Africa, and we don't have the sprawling, massive forests of the United States or Europe. Instead, we have a mixture of bushveld and clumps of trees that are the closest thing you'll find to a forest, at least in my part of the country. Unlike many of the other stories submitted here, this one doesn't come with a terrifying twist or face-to-face exposure with some ungodly, otherworldly ghoul. This is merely a retelling of an experience I had that constantly reminds me that there are things lurking in all corners of the world that we can't explain. It all started back in 2006, not long after I had entered high school. I had made friends with some of my fellow students, and before long we had made plans to go camping. We convinced our folks to come along, and over a long weekend we set up our tents and other paraphernalia not far from the small dam. On the other side of the dam was a fairly large expanse of trees. It was a mix of commercial lumber forest and natural woodland, and only recently did I look up the area and realise it was connected to a much larger greenbelt that washed across the eastern side of the country. The first day was about as average as they come. We joked around, fished and explored the area. I can't say that I ever felt the overwhelming sense of dread that others often feel when in proximity to the inexplicable. I've camped all over the country, met some of the big five up close, and we even once had leopards come through our camp in the dead of night, so I wasn't particularly wary of the outdoors in any way. It would be the second night that things became a little strange. It was in the early hours of the morning, and something woke me up suddenly. It didn't take long for me to realise it was coming from the other side of the dam, in the trees. It sounded like something big was moving through them. Immediately, your mind probably jumps to a large mammal, like buffalo or elephant. But we were staying on a piece of land that never had anything more than the occasional buck. Whatever this thing was, it was huge. I could hear branches being torn apart, trees being dismantled, and an eerie silence that followed it in its path of destruction. I didn't even leave my tent at any point. Why would anyone do that? And remained vigilant long after the chaos in the trees had come to an end. As the sun rose and we all eventually left our tent, my friends confirmed that they had also heard the same noises. Our parents, on the other hand, didn't hear a single thing, having slept soundly the entire night, being the constantly exhausted creatures that they are. And so our day begun, and it didn't take long before our curiosity demanded that we venture around the dam and find the source of all the carnage from the previous night. Once we had entered the trees, it became apparent that something had indeed left its mark as it came through. Trees had been destroyed, the ground was shredded, and for me, personally, it looked as though a bomb had gone off right in the middle of the woodland. It was unnerving, and although we didn't find any more traces of what had caused all the disturbance, we exited the forest and decided to try and forget about the whole thing and resume our day. Many hours later, as the sun was dipping below the horizon, we had resigned ourselves to fishing again, a fruitless attempt at catching some dinner for that evening. While we were busy tossing our lines, I noticed something just at the tree line, on the other side of the water. At first, I thought it was some kind of reflection off of the dam, or maybe some kind of torch, but it quickly dawned on me that there was a pair of eyes. They were orange, reflective and unblinking, staring straight at us. I can't say I felt uneasy at first, as it was common to see eyes watching you. They almost always belonged to some small buck that was roaming the area. This assumption was only strengthened by the fact that this particular set of eyes were quite low down to the ground, at about the height a buck would stand at. Nothing seemed out of place for the first few minutes that we all watched as it watched us, as it was always fascinating to come across wild animals. As we watched the eyes watching us, they suddenly began to move, not left or right, but up. This thing, whatever it was slowly standing up, as its eyes gained height that was well above any buck, and any human for that matter. Now, I've heard similar stories of people seeing eyes suddenly gaining height, which is often later attributed to a small animal climbing a tree and then looking back, creating the illusion that the eyes belong to a much larger animal. The difference between those stories and this one is that the eyes often turn away from you as the animal climbs the tree, after which it turns back to look at you again. This wasn't the case at all. This was clearly something that was standing to full height after sitting or kneeling down. The eyes, they never looked away from us for one moment. Another thing to point out to further dissuade the belief that it was nothing more than a large animal, like an elephant were the eyes themselves. An elephant has a big head, and its eyes are pretty far apart. The same for a wildebeest or hippo. This creature's eyes were close together, with the same placement as a human's. I didn't see the shape of the thing, nor did I have any indication of its colour, or whether it had fur or skin. We begin to see the eyes around the time that things go incredibly dark while the day shifts to night, and the tree line in question was absolutely pitch black. We stood in frozen fear for a while as this unknown creature watched us, and only started running back once it had turned around and we began to hear the same sounds of destruction that we'd heard the night before. We decided not to tell our parents. We were old enough to realise that they would have more than likely accused us of overreacting, and that the ordeal could be explained through the mundane. Even to this day, I haven't discussed the incident with my parents. I'm not a zoologist, nor am I a biologist, but I have a sound knowledge of the animals that roam the African wilds, and no matter how much research I've done, there is simply no animal on record that quite matches this thing's height, and even delving into some of the local Zulu cryptid beliefs that held no answers. The area that we stayed in has had some weird occurrences, such as a series of deaths some years after, where the police weren't able to find any real evidence as to what happened to the poor souls that died out there. For us, we eventually packed up our camp and headed home. Fortunate enough to be the witness and nothing more, and I never, ever been back. I've long since given up looking for any real answers, and while what I witnessed can easily be connected to many of the cryptids that prowl other parts of the world, that little corner of South Africa has almost no stories to tell of ancient beasts or beings that inhabit the land. I don't know if I'll ever find out what it was in the trees that weekend, but maybe not knowing is a small mercy that allows me to sleep soundly at night. Wow, I hope you guys enjoyed that small compilation of stories there. Of course, as ever, please do let me know down below If you haven't subscribed to DMT, smash the subscribe button and kick the notification bell into the stratosphere to stay up to date with all DMT content. I hope you're all having a lovely week and looking forward to an even better weekend. Remember guys, if you're going camping, hiking or possibly caving, keep your wits about you. Take the necessary safety measures. And above all, remember, be safe, not sorry.